bit different this year. We haven't hosted an in-person event for about 3 years. Hopefully you can hear me okay. And so we appreciate everyone who has come, especially to our speakers, many who came at short notice. We thought it would be interesting to have more of a discussion for a few of our topics instead of just panel discussions where we have presentations. And so with that, I wanted to, I don't think I have your bios on me. I wanted to introduce the panelists and explain why we've invited them. Piero Tozzi is with Congressman Chris Smith's office and has worked in human rights for a long time. And Congressman Chris Smith is the first person who hosted a hearing on trafficking of Coptic women and girls 10 years ago. And our current president, Carolyn Doss, testified at that hearing. So this is kind of bringing together a full circle of history of the office that is kind of champion and been, I guess, the leader on this issue. And so basically we want to have a little bit of a conversation to see, what's happened since then. So I'm going to start with you, Piero. How did Congressman Smith first become involved on the topic of trafficking of Coptic women?
Well, and thank you. It's very good to be here. Actually, it's very good to be back here because I was a speaker at I think it was 2010 when you had the initial Coptic Solidarity event out by Dulles Airport, and then again in 2011. And it's kind of funny because coming here, we did a little bit of a double take. I recognized some faces and some people recognized me, but we all get a little bit older after 10 years or plus. So, but it is really very good to be back. Congressman Chris Smith has really been a leader on the issue of human trafficking, and he's the author of the Trafficking Victims Prevention Act of 2000, which is sort of the template for it. And even before that, he was involved in the issue and really kind of created that issue, created that space in the Department of State, the Trafficking in Persons Department. He created the position of the ambassador at large on human trafficking. Now, I've worked with him for 9 years, and it was kind of funny because before then, when I was actually engaged with you folks, and I was at Alliance Defending Freedom, which our friend Sean here is now with, I remember bringing Adele Gindi and were you too, Majid? I think you were there as well, to Chris Smith's office, and we all sat down. And one of the things that amazed me is how well he knew this issue and how passionate he was about this. So here's somebody who I think really who understands the issue, the horrible issue of human trafficking in all its many forms, but very much understands the issue that's confronted by the Coptic community and Coptic girls in particular. And when we think of the issue of identifying what the definition of trafficking is, the use of force, fraud, and coercion to force women in particular into situations where they're vulnerable, well, that really has been what has, we see here and what we really, I think, need to address. Yeah. But I think
well, thank you for reminding us that he was the one who headed that legislation, because I knew that, but I'd forgotten. So it's important to recognize his track record in trafficking for so long, and not just for Coptic women. Okay. So Carolyn, since you participated in that first hearing, I'd like to ask if you've seen any progress or significant changes in the situation of Coptic women and minor girls since the time of that hearing.
Thank you, Lindsay. Awesome question. I think I was initially invited to join the discussion or the hearing because I work with a lot of Christians who come from Egypt and apply for asylum, many of which are women, of course. And I have not seen an improvement. I have actually seen a decline. Now, unfortunately, because the government does not prosecute these crimes. You won't find any actual data on it, but from a asylum attorney's perspective, I have seen an increase. So one of the most common questions I ask women when I'm working on asylum cases is, of course, why are you afraid? And all of them say, I don't want to get kidnapped. Okay, well, why do you think you would get kidnapped? Oh, because there was this lady who lived on the street behind me, and I would say in at least 50% of cases, women can actually point to a woman they know in their neighborhood or their church that was kidnapped. Do you remember her name? Oh yeah, this was her name. So it's very real to a lot of the people that are women who are choosing to flee Egypt. And if they didn't know of a personal case, then it was something they were reading online. Now, because of the advancement of social media, everyone has access. Maybe back in 2011, there wasn't as much access for the average individual. The only thing Christians really know how to do in Egypt is run to Facebook. That's like the only place where they think they can find help. They put their plea out there, they put the picture of their daughter, and do a quick description of what happened. And that's their way of reaching out to the world and saying, someone please help me. For sure, you see way more posts now than you ever saw in the past, because it is like an outlet that everyone knows how to reach out through. So personally, yes, I have seen it through my work with Egyptians who are fleeing Egypt. It's a big concern. It's something that touches on the lives of almost every Coptic woman in Egypt. Yeah.
It's interesting the connection that you point out with the use of technology, because it's hard to assess. Like you said, are the cases increasing, or is it just that there's a ability to more quickly and easily, post on Facebook? I know one of the issues that we have faced on this topic is getting the U.S. State Department and the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom to take it seriously. The discussions kind of go in circles, typically saying how hard it is to verify the cases, basically saying that these women of their own volition leave. They fall in love, they want to convert. Of course, none of it matches any of the details. So from your perspective, Piero, do you think the situation has improved with the U.S. government and policy on trafficking? Like, what are the significant things that you have seen?
Well, I think if you don't identify the problem and report on it, it doesn't exist, as far as the U.S. government's concerned. I think you mentioned USERF and also the International Religious Freedom Report, but also the Trafficking in Persons Report. That is not mentioned there. And again, force, fraud, and coercion, that's involved. And some of these cases, too, point out that, say, well, they eloped and that sort of thing. We know, and from your excellent report that you did in 2020, where, these women are oftentimes tricked and prospects of marriage. There's this indication, well, maybe I want to convert and that sort of, and so there is that fraud element too. So so I think we have to look at that. With USERF, and this I think goes to the question. The hearing that we had back, well, I guess there was 3 hearings. There was the OSCE, Helsinki Commission, there was the subcommittee. But one thing that was very frustrating is the response of the State Department. Even Michael Posner, from the founder of the Lawyers Committee for Human Rights, which became Human Rights First. And back when I was practicing law, I did a couple of cases with them. Very good organization, very good asylum program. But the response that he had there at the hearing was like, well, we don't really know, and we don't have, give us some evidence. Well, Frank Wolf, gave evidence, handed it to Ambassador Patterson. Chris Smith gave evidence to Michael Posner. And one of the reasons I note Frank Wolf, and you folks must know Frank, I mean, what a tremendous voice and a tremendous champion. He's now a USERF commissioner as of several months ago.
Right.
So I think one thing that we can do just as an action item is going to Frank Wolf, and knowing him, he's like a dog with a bone, in a good way. I say that, yeah. He really, and he gets passionate. And I think that's very, very appropriate to remind him. You folks have documented cases. You've given chapter and verse, which is what we were told was needed. I think one of the very frustrating things that Mr. Smith had back at those hearings is that there was, well, what has been done? When Ambassador Patterson was given files and case files and names and descriptions, nothing was done. Mm-hmm. Well, it is important, and I think that's incumbent upon us here in Congress to raise this issue and to continue to raise this issue, both in the International Religious Freedom Report, but also in the Trafficking in Persons Report, and then, of course, USERF. But I think having someone like Frank Wolf there now, too, will help address this issue. I'm pretty hopeful, knowing Frank.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, Congressman, our former Congressman Frank Wolf has been a huge supporter of Coptic equality for many years. So I appreciate that suggestion. We'll definitely follow up on it. In terms of what we were just speaking about, like how we document it, and so Congressman Smith expressed frustration, like what is being done. We have had this conversation over and over again. How do you document these cases when often people are being threatened? So let's say a minor girl is taken and her family goes to a local police station. Often what happens is they either refuse to take the report, or they sometimes just take the report and not do anything about it. I mean, there's a lot of variations on this theme, right? But essentially what happens is the police do nothing. It has been documented that often they are being financially compensated for not saying anything. And at the end of the day, what do we have? We have personal phone calls reporting to us that these women are missing, followed often by visits from national security, and then families being intimidated, withdrawing their complaints. And a researcher may laugh about Facebook, but that's often where most of these posts are happening. It's a priest put on Facebook when a woman goes missing. And this is one of the main ways that we can track it. So Carolyn, with all that being said, what do you think can be done to improve the tracking of these cases, and also where do you see the majority of the abductions taking place? Are there places in Egypt where there's more abductions? And where I'm going with this is if we know of where those places are, if there could be any accountability, maybe we could set a new precedent.
Thank you. So as far as tracking, I think we pretty much touched on that. It's almost impossible to track accurately what's happening because the government refuses to prosecute. And then on one side, in addition to refusing to prosecute, you have the pressure that they put on victims in the event that the victims' families spoke out, looked for their girl, insisted on justice. So because government puts so much pressure on victims and their families, it's almost impossible to get real numbers. It's up to organizations like Coptic Solidarity to take in those complaints, document them as best as possible, track through things like social media, the only media, Facebook, the only media outlet Egyptians tend to use. But until the government does their part and steps up to it, then we will have a difficult time to actually track these numbers. And that's probably one of the things that people, on the US side can do, put pressure on their counterparts. Hey, find me one person that's been arrested for this in the last decade. Just one. Just one. I mean, it's kind of hard to imagine that, all these girls ran away because they were in love with these people. Mm-hmm. There isn't one. Even the cases with minors, whether they even wanted to go or not, this is a crime. In the United States, that's statutory rape. You cannot just take a child and disappear with her. And there's actual laws in Egypt that would prevent that, but they're not implemented in Christian cases. They're not. And then the second part of your question was...
Are there certain areas where the kidnappings, abductions take place more than others?
No. I have clients all over the country. And you would think you wouldn't hear about it happening in Cairo, but it does. It does. Cairo, Alexandria, Upper Egypt, everywhere. This has become so common because it's easy. It's easy. And if the family pushes it, police, in many cases, quiet down the family. I remember reading a case a couple years ago. I don't remember, the details of it, but the overview was, girl gets kidnapped, family's like, I'm not taking this. They put the Facebook post up, and then the family and their relatives go and do a little, as best as they can, protest in front of the police station. I remember the brother's arm is broken, the mom is injured in whatever way, and ultimately a bunch of the male relatives got arrested and got restraining orders slapped on them. That was the reaction of the police when the family pushed it. So it is widespread, in my personal opinion, from talking to victims all over the country, and they obviously don't feel like they have recourse. And that's why they flee. So many times when I ask women, why are you, I don't want to get kidnapped, that's why I'm here. Those who have daughters, I don't want to lose my daughter. There's no way I could get her back if I did lose her. So they would rather abandon their careers, their homes, their families, everything they've ever known to preserve the safety and well-being of their families, and that's why they come here.
Yeah. It's so much more pervasive than most people realize. And I think that's one of the reasons why we can't give up, and Coptic Solidarity will continue to try to create awareness despite the difficulties of documenting.
Lindsay, may I add one more thing?
Oh, absolutely.
Since we were on the topic of numbers, we were talking only about actual successful, for lack of a better word, kidnappings. This doesn't include all the attempted kidnappings. Many of the people I meet are victims of attempted kidnappings. That's another whole category. And
That
that's
causes them to be fearful and
right.
want to leave.
So a lot of them, not only did they know someone in their neighborhood or their church that was kidnapped, but they have a personal story. One time I was in a taxi, he goes the wrong way, I start screaming, yelling, I have no option but to jump out of a moving car. I remember another one which was really terrible. There was an attempted kidnapping and a woman was carrying her toddler. So the taxi cab driver goes wherever he's going, assuming this woman is not going to be able to react because she has a child in her hand, just decides to start beating the guy in the back of the hand. Taxi cab slows down. She jumps out with her kid. The guy pursues her, stabs the baby instead of the mom. Thank God the baby survived, just with a very large scar on their leg. But, there's plenty of stories out there, and those will never get documented. Those will never get documented. So that's like another category. But,
Yeah.
Sorry, toss it back to you.
Oh, that's that's an important point.
I'm just saying, look like, save that for later.
Yeah, save it for later. With all of that that Carolyn has shared, and the difficulties of documenting, let me rephrase this. There's a lot of members of Congress who would like to have a good relationship with Egypt. We understand that there's a lot of other factors in the U.S. relationship with Egypt that are not just about human rights. Sometimes, almost always, those other factors are a higher priority. So kind of with that in perspective, what types of actions, what types of things could Congress do given the relationship that we do have, and maybe what kind of things would be compelling to members who say, well, I want to help with human rights, but I also want to maintain a strong relationship with Egypt?
Yeah, I think you ask a very real question, and we have to look at the larger context. And Egypt, for all its problems, is we have friendly relations. We obviously give a lot of military and other assistance to Egypt. And we also have to weigh, the issue of if we go back a decade ago, the issue of the Muslim Brotherhood, and the relative balance, yeah, and the problems here, and sometimes we're confronted with a situation that's a bad situation, but there are also worse alternatives. So we do have to be, I think, clear-eyed and realistic about this. I think that you do have members who do have a relationship, and I'll say this too in fairness, that Egyptian diplomats are quite professional and quite good. And they also are reasonable, and you can dialogue with them. I think if you develop a relationship, you are also able to do sometimes some quiet diplomacy, as it were, and you can bring specific cases involving Coptic Christians. And I'd also say that, you know, you receive a very different reaction, say, than some of our counterparts who push figures that are, you know, ties with the Muslim Brotherhood. There's a very different attitude towards those types of cases and political prisoners and whatnot, as opposed to Coptic Christians who may be bloggers or other such things. So there is, I think, a practical reason for wanting to maintain good relations, and that generally there is an open door, or lines of communication are open. And one, it's a practical consideration. You have to weigh, you know, sometimes making an angry public statement can be counterproductive. Sometimes it is productive. That's a balance there. But you know, I think this is a very good question, and you know, we have to be sort of realists, you know, Aristotelian realists as well as Platonic idealists. You know, you know, as we approach these things. So yeah. But that's a good question. Yeah.
No easy answers there. We've run a little bit behind schedule today, so I think I'll just do maybe one more question with each of you. One of the things that Carolyn touched on in her opening statement was about, you know, the cases of attacks and whatever crimes that happen against Copts. What gets reported in the media is typically, you know, maybe 1%, a very tiny percentage of the number of atrocities that are actually happening. It's typically with the cases that are reported in the media where somehow magically the woman is returned. And I think you've all seen these videos, right, of a woman who, there was a case of a woman who was married, she had several children, she was abducted, she was forced to wear a headscarf and to say that she had converted to Islam. And she was clearly under duress. You know, she's recording this video. And this has happened a number of times. And so that case got a lot of international attention, a lot of media attention. And all of a sudden, she reappears, and I've never heard of a single person being held accountable for the disappearance or the reemergence, right? So what we do know is that the Egyptian government has the ability to track a lot of these women and to help get them back. Whether or not they're willing to do it, you know, is another story. And so, with the issue of impunity, Carolyn, what do you think what more can be done to try to hold the Egyptian government accountable for those types of cases?
I would have to say pressure from our side. Unfortunately, the Egyptian government doesn't seem to respond to anything else but that. I mean, this has been going on for a really long time. They're very well aware of it. Something like this is not going to happen and the government not know about it. They know about it. And like you said, they reappear. So they know the source, they know where the girl was held. Obviously they have these details, but they intentionally choose to not prosecute. International pressure. You know, I thank organizations like Coptic Solidarity for highlighting the issue. Unfortunately, it's something that doesn't get much attention. Coptic Solidarity does put together these reports and at the same time help families, for lack of a better word, expose, promote the tragedy that's happened to that family. And those high-profile cases that do get international attention, those girls are sometimes returned. So I do, although I don't think the government, without any pressure, will do anything about it, at least organizations like us can try and get as much attention to these cases, perhaps increasing the chances of a return, which at the end of the day makes a difference in the lives of that particular family.
Yeah. And I might just add, too, that using international mechanisms, United Nations mechanisms, whether it's the Universal Periodic Review or special rapporteurs such as on freedom of religion and belief. And, there are a number of ways to apply, I think, that pressure that Caroline was talking about and kind of shine a light on it. So that's another avenue as well, so.
Yeah, that's good
Could
advice.
you please be kind enough to give them all these channels that they can use it to apply pressure to the government? Because apparently you have more knowledge about these channels than we are.
Yeah, I think, it's kind of funny because I think when I spoke 10 years ago, that was one of the topics I was asked to speak about, was using these channels. And I know I see Sean over there. I'm going to volunteer him too, because he had I was in his position back then, but it's a UN accredited organization, but using the various rapporteurs, also the trafficking rapporteurs. So it's using multiple channels and streams, U.S. government, but also United Nations as well, and hold countries accountable. When you sign the Convention on the Rights of the Child, when you ratify that, as Egypt has, there is a treaty monitoring body for that. And that's also, they receive reports as well. So utilizing all these various mechanisms, because oftentimes, as Caroline mentioned, these are children who are kidnapped, and that's another avenue. So I think we can look at sort of the universe and these various streams and make sure that we're utilizing that.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, you're actually answering part of my final question. In regard to I just wanted to mention, in regard to working with the UN bodies, Coptic Solidarity, like many organizations, has applied for ECOSOC status and is every time deferred. And as we all know, the process to gain ECOSOC accreditation is it's not a clear up or down vote. It's a convoluted process in which I have had a diplomat tell me that Egypt told him it's a red line, do not let Coptic Solidarity get ECOSOC status at the UN. With that being said, what are our chances? So we have been fortunate to have partners that we've been able to work with, and we can approach special rapporteurs, like you're saying, and we can. There's some things that we can do, but in my mind, it leads to this idea of partnership, as well as what lessons can we learn from possibly other communities who've been, because I know that the Copts in Egypt are not the only ones who've been through this. So do you have any parting advice for us, lessons learned from your work in trafficking and international cooperation?
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of people of goodwill out there and organizations of goodwill, and that idea of partnering is very important, and there are organizations that may not be focused necessarily on Coptic Christians, but have a broader interest in religious freedom, for example, that you can partner with. There are anti-trafficking organizations that you can partner with, and I think it's important that your story be told. Okay, and that the oftentimes when people, great work that Caroline does, and just it is when people hear it, one thing that I think surprises all of us is, how many people know the Copts? When Raymond mentions that it's between 10 and 20%, let's just say 15% of Egypt's population. How many people know that? And even you go to Capitol Hill, you know, let alone sort of the man on the street type thing. So it's events like this. It is, and it also is working on effective lobbying. I think one of the early speakers you had was Rafi from the Armenian National Congress. I remember when I spoke, and you were one of the questions that you had, and it was a very good one, is like, look, the Armenians have been very successful in raising and elevating their issues. What can we take to sort of bottle it and, you know, do it same thing ourselves? You look at Jewish organizations too, that's similarly as well. So learning from them, you know, as to do that. There was a hand raised.
Yeah,
We want
I
to.
raised my hand. Maybe
Yeah.
the Copts don't have the same power as the Armenians, or we don't have the same freedom. We could die or be killed just to say our like opinion.
Well, but I think here in the U.S., you do. I know now Mr. Smith approaches this issue because of you know, just his passion that he has for it. But you know, in New Jersey, you know, you have a lot of Copts there, and you know, they should be going to other congressional offices and Senate offices and saying that, hey, this is important to us. We're your constituents. And so when I mentioned the Armenians, you know, I think that's a group that similarly has been persecuted and has been able to sort of get that into the consciousness of Congress and society more broadly. So that's why I mentioned that as something that I think can be helpful too.
If I can make one final comment, kind of like bouncing between Piero and the young lady who just made a comment. Personally, I have tried to recruit witnesses, personally,
yep.
and it's almost impossible. Although they are safely here in the U.S., they have family members back in Egypt who they are terrified will suffer consequences. I don't know if you remember, we did one hearing.
Yep.
I can't remember. Okay, right, and the one was right behind the curtains, and she testified about her attempted kidnapping. She too had a baby when she was almost kidnapped, and she was terrified.
Yeah.
She was terrified, but she was so brave, and they had her behind the curtain,
Yep.
and she made sure to exclude all names from any
Right.
of her testimony. She was terrified.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I remember, I think Anne was her pseudonym that she used, and it's difficult because oftentimes, we have with trafficking victims or other victims, they're re-traumatized.
Yeah.
And that really makes it, I think, very difficult to ask people to go through that when they have suffered such trauma. And that's why, you know, your voice is important, even though you're not giving, say, eyewitness testimony.
Right.
You still are an advocate, and you're able to get that idea out front. You know, sir.
Yes, as a part of the problem of kidnapping Christian women in Egypt is how fast and easy to change their official ID paper. It is very easy to change from Christian ID to Muslim. About 20 years ago, up to 20 years ago, there was a process to change the official paper, to do a hearing committee, or it was called Nasr al-Sharid, his advice. The person who has to change his religion has to sit in a hearing with a counselor or sometimes priest to be sure that it is real, his own or her own will to change without any enforcement to change. Now, it was cancelled, this hearing process. We want to bring it back because it was a part of the unofficial process or law. To be sure that before changing the religion, it is his or her own will, free will. We want it to be back this way.
I know exactly what you're talking about, because during Mubarak's time, I did speak with many people that said, yes, my sister was brought, and we had an opportunity to question her, and the priest was brought. So back in the day, during Mubarak's time, the person who wanted to convert was brought into either a police station or state security and given an opportunity to talk to her family and her priest so they could make sure that she actually wanted to convert. It wasn't a perfect process because people I talked to said, my sister was clearly drugged. My wife was clearly hysterical. Sometimes I couldn't tell if it was her because she was behind on the cob. So it certainly wasn't a perfect process, but perhaps having that sort of block in the way might slow down the kidnapping and may just be, you know, something that would cause them to pause before they went ahead and did that. Does it perfectly solve the problem? No. But has the problem gotten worse since now she's not entitled to counsel with her family or priest? From personal experience, I've seen yes. That's a good point. Yeah.
Well, thank you both so much for this discussion, and for the audience, we appreciate your patience as we're running a little behind. But also, we hope, Piero, that you will share with Congressman Smith how much we appreciate his work on behalf of Coptic women. He's definitely been a leader in that, and we appreciate it.